I'm Mike Costello, and I'm here with Dr. Iris Freelander, and we'd like to talk to you about the fact that there is enough of everything for everyone. In a society that is built upon limit and lack, that sounds like a crazy statement, doesn't it, Iris?
Yes, it does indeed. And we often lower ourselves to think that way. And then we know people who seem to consistently think that way. But it takes a great deal of energy to think in that fashion when it takes so much less energy to just accept the fact that, yes, there's plenty for all.
Plenty of everything, isn't there?
Yeah.
There's plenty of thought, there's plenty of love, there's plenty of affection, there's plenty of money, there's plenty of the resources. And we know that resources, physical resources, are sometimes allocated differently in different parts of the world, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But in New Thought, so often when people start talking about there's enough of everything for everyone, we begin to think about money. And of course, we believe in prosperity teaching, we believe in abundance teaching, but at the core of the abundance teaching and the philosophy that there is enough for everyone, there is enough of everything for everyone, we know that there is a limitless supply of all that is good. And whatever is good in the universe and in life and in mind and in spirit is always available in abundant supply. And the key is how we attract that substance and how we feel about that substance and the issue of substance itself. And that, of course, in our teaching, substance is a variety of things, and it comes all the way from thought and mind and ideas all the way through the physical aspects of our life. There are limitless ideas, limitless thoughts, and limitless prosperous ideas and abundant supply in all aspects of life. And hopefully in the next few minutes, we'll be able to share how we feel about that and change the ideas that so many people have about limit and lack. But limit and lack just permeate a lot of people's mentality.
Yes, and when it does, they're very unhappy, miserable, and they don't see any light in the darkness. When others who might have much less than that person sees there's plenty, knows that there is plenty, and there is plenty, and it manifests in that way. So it's all our perception, isn't it? We go through life on a perception. If our perception is that of limit and lack, it doesn't matter how much we have. We read about people who die with thousands of dollars, perhaps even tacked inside their clothing or in their mattress or in their bank account, but yet they have that feeling of lack, and they live with a feeling of lack, and that's very sad, but it doesn't need be.
And it begins in mind. It begins in mind, and it goes to even such things as options in life. So often in our counseling work, we talk with people, and again, to shift off of the financial aspects of abundance, although we certainly believe in that. But so often people believe, well, there are no options. I have no options in life. I hear that often when I talk with people, especially when they're in the midst of great difficulty or loss, or end of a relationship, particularly, and or maybe a job has ended, and they believe that there are no jobs. Well, of course, there are many jobs, and so it is true exactly what you said, that we begin the process of belief in mind. And if our minds believe that there is an abundance, then the abundance follows, because that abundant supply is created out of our own belief in the limitless supply. Indeed, there are limitless options in all of our lives. But so often, you and I have both spent a lot of time talking with people who believe that I have no more options.
Yeah.
And we know, sadly, people who are at the end of life and who are contemplating suicide, who will say, I have no choice, I have no options in life, when in fact there are limitless options. There are enough options for everyone, but we don't see it, and or many people don't see it. You and I see it, and we share that with people. But seeing that limitless potential and knowing that there is enough of everything for everyone, then the challenge is to get enough of everything that we all need in our lives around to everyone. And it begins with that idea of consciousness and mind. And I'm glad you started us at that point, because we need to begin our thought process in the fertile soil of our thoughts. And our thoughts need to believe that there is enough of whatever it is
Yeah.
that we need in life.
We need to know that and then act accordingly. And in our counseling work, we've both found people who think they don't have any option at all.
Mhm.
But then as we talk with them and they begin to see that they do have the several options and they see what they are, because it's interesting that I know I never tell people what to do, and I believe that you don't either, but we just talk to them and they then see all their various options,
Mhm.
and then they decide what they're going to do. And there's nothing more thrilling for me than to have a client come for counseling and then go away and make their own decisions. And if they're so happy with that decision, and they wonder, why didn't I do that sooner? But the option, as you said earlier, the option was always there. They just couldn't see it. Sometimes it just takes a special circumstance for us to see that we do have many options. And life is choices, and we can make our choice and live with it. And as long as it doesn't hurt another person, then it's the right choice.
Mhm.
And so to me, there's nothing more rewarding, and I'm sure you feel that same way.
Absolutely. And the idea that we can create a consciousness of abundance and
Hmm.
prosperity. And when we talk about abundance of consciousness of abundance, we're not necessarily talking about having loads of everything. We're talking about having our needs met, whatever those are. Some people have needs or desires that are larger than others, and we're not judging that. We're not
Yeah.
talking about that at all. And we're not also going to spend much time in this program, and we don't spend any time at all in our counseling work or at the church center talking about abundance and prosperity
Mhm.
consciousness from the idea of getting money, because we know those principles work, but
Yeah.
so often those principles become the focus of the teaching, and the teaching is so much more far-reaching than that. And so the abundance that we have from a financial standpoint is a byproduct of our consciousness and our belief system in the limitless potential that we have and the abundant supply that is always accessible to us. So often, as we talk to people of other faith traditions or of other that have other ideas about limit and lack, they'll say, well, our belief or the new thought belief is so cruel because it's insensitive to people who are suffering. And the fact is, we know that there are a lot of people suffering. That's a reality of life. But that suffering can be transmuted or changed as they change their way of thinking. And of course, we just think of people who live in abject poverty in areas of the world and communities, and we don't have to go far to see
Hmm.
people living in abject poverty, and yet they're living in abject poverty. And again, we're talking about physical aspects of life in the shadow of great abundance and prosperity. And so many people are bothered about the fact that the haves and the have-nots, and it's so inequitable. But the fact is that we all know stories about people who have come out of abject poverty to be tremendously successful in life. And so it is accessible and available. And it is a process that begins in mind, and it is spurred by a change in activity and dynamic of mind and thought and action. And sometimes it's caused by individuals, it's always caused by an individual's decision, but it's also helped by those around them and by a sense of community. So when we look at community and we look at our need to do for others, that's a part of it. But that's not the solution. The solution to eliminating poverty is not for those who have it to give it away. It is for those who have it to give it away and use it, but it's also for those who have the ability to have it and to create it, to share with others the mentality and the consciousness that builds upon that idea. And so it's really an important aspect of life. Also, this idea of that there are enough options,
Hmm.
there's enough of everything. We're not just talking about money again. There's enough for everybody. So there are options, there are solutions, there are ideas in everyone's life that can bring them to a new place and a new place of living that sometimes have nothing at all to do with economic situations, but have everything to do with their ability and their confidence and belief in themselves. What we call this program is confident living. And we talk about having confidence in our own ability to live a God-given life. And again, it's not detracting from the presence and power of God. It's not taking away, because we know that the source of everything is God and the divine. But the reality is that while God is the source of all of our substance, all of our needs, it is within our mind and heart and life to move through the process of making this manifest and making it a reality in our lives.
Yes, and in the lives of others. And when we see other people reacting to life in a way that's not familiar to us. We need to just keep our own counsel and let them be. And I learned that back when I was a very small child. My dad had noted a young man in a young boy. He was like 10 years old, and he was dressed in rags whenever my dad would see him. So the next time my dad had the opportunity, he bought that young man a set of clothing, shoes and socks and pants and all the clothing to cover his body. And then the next day he came and he put it on then and there when my dad presented it to him. And the next day he came back up to where my dad worked, and his trousers had been cut off and his shirt had been mutilated and his shoes had been, he'd cut his shoes even. And my dad said to him, "Tell me who did that and I'll get them." And he said, "Oh, Mr. Compton, I did this myself because they were just not comfortable." And I learned a big lesson there, and a lesson that stayed with me to this day, that we can't know what other people want. We just have to accept that if that's what they want, that's what they want, and drop it. And I know that's how you live without even probably realizing that that's how you think and live. But I know that that's your creed, and we need to do that. We need to allow other people the privilege and the right to live their lives the way they wish to live without being judgmental, even in our hearts, and certainly not to let them know that we're being judgmental, but just let it be. And what does the young kids say? Shine it on. So let them be and let them make their own decisions. And then they have all they need easily, and then there is enough for everyone. But it's our perception of what we need that is the big question, isn't it?
Absolutely. And going back to what we talked about at the very beginning of the program, the consciousness or our way of thinking that is based upon limit and lack. And so many of us, and certainly in talking with people in counseling, we find a lot of people who've come out of generations and family situations where they have been told and taught about limit and lack. And they've been taught that we don't do this, or we're not able to have this amount of prosperity, or we're not able to go to college. We're not all of the kinds of things that people are told in their youth and as they come up through life become a part of their way of thinking. And we need to, and we build within our ministry and our work and our counseling, the cultivation of a consciousness of universal substance and unlimited potential of every person that's based upon the dynamic of mind that can be transformed at any given point in time. And for a lot of people, they need to, and we help them and we want to see them begin to give up the consciousness of limit and lack, their mentality of limit and lack. And it's very interesting, as people give up that consciousness of limit and lack, it opens a door and it allows things to flow in. And of course, we believe totally and completely in both the inflow and the outflow of all aspects of life. That's a universal truth. And so in order to have the understanding and the realization of the fact that there's enough of everything for everyone, we need to have a free flow of things. And I'm thinking now of just ideas. And, we've talked so often about how wonderful it is when people share ideas. And yet so many of us have come from backgrounds where we're taught that our ideas and our thoughts have to be in this way. And yet when we're surrounded by people, and for many of us it's through the educational process when we go to school or college or university or after that in the daily life, that we learn that there's a whole universe of thought out there in the world. And if we become a part of it, then our minds begin to open up. And as our minds begin to open up and we let go of that limit and that lack in terms of our own way of thinking, then new ideas come to us. And there are limitless ideas, limitless thoughts, limitless creations, limitless things that we can do. And that all has to do with this issue of the fact that there's enough for everyone. And then, of course, later in the program, before we get away, we want to talk about the fact that there's enough love for everyone. And so many of us feel so unloved.
Yeah.
And so many of us feel so isolated. That's important.
Yes, it is very important. And I can recall there was a family that my sons and I were very friendly with. And one of the two, it was a couple, and one said to the other, "Well, Iris's sons are not at all jealous that we're in her life." And so the other said, "Well, no, because they know that they're loved, and they know that there's enough love to go everywhere." And that's a very good example of what you were just saying, that there is enough love for everyone all the time, And the more we give, like we used to sing that song at church, to me almost too much. Love is something, if you give it away, it comes back even more. And that's true. That as we give it away, and that's true with money too, and I know that's your creed. I remember once we were at our church was at a certain facility where they used to have food, and people would come there for food and money. And then that wasn't our point, but they didn't know that, so they would still come back. And I said to you, "Oh, how do you handle all these people who come and want a handout, want money?" And you said, "Well, I give them some." And I thought that was just really lovely.
And we never run out of money to
Yes.
give, and so we continued to give it, although we stopped that as well. We'd like to pause at this point in the program and offer you the opportunity to receive some literature so that you can continue to study the concepts and ideas that we're sharing with you today.
We would like to offer you the opportunity to receive one of these free booklets to further your understanding of the New Thought message of confident living. Each month we will feature a different booklet, which will be mailed to you free and postage paid. Simply address your request to Confident Living at P.O. Box 7726, Long Beach, California, 90807.
There is enough love for everyone, isn't there? And, so I'm thinking now of the number of people over the years who've come for counseling who've ended relationships and have believed that there was no more love for them, or children or parents who've believed that their children have failed them in so many ways, and so many people who have thought that there was just no hope. And also thinking of the number of people who we're surrounded with all the time who tell us how bad this world is and how unloving and uncaring it is. But in fact, there's love and care at every corner. There's love and care for enough for everyone. And the idea that this world is a terrible, wretched place is in its own a form of limit and lack in mind and thought. And I would say that to our viewers and our listeners, if they believe that this is a bad world and that things are just getting worse and that things are just awful, be cautious of that way of thinking and that line of thinking, because that way of thinking will take you down the road that tells you that there isn't enough of anything. And when that begins to be your belief system about the world and life, then it affects your finances, and it affects your health, and it affects your emotions and every aspect of your life. In fact, there is love for everyone. And when love ends or a relationship ends, there is something wonderful that could happen. And I'm just thinking now of a gentleman whom I know don't know well anymore, but I used to know him well, and he's long since moved away, but who married and had a wonderful relationship with a wonderful woman for 30 or 40 years, and she died of a very tragic illness and long illness, and he thought he would never love again, and found another love of his life when he was in his 60s, and that lasted for 20-some years, and then that wonderful woman had a similar situation, and then he found himself in his 80s and thought that it was all over and there was nothing else, and came upon his third wife, and so now is happy and healthy in his 90s in his third relationship. And certainly that's a unique situation, and we're not saying that everyone that has a death needs to go out and find a new husband or wife, but what I am saying is that there's enough for everyone. And if we choose, if we have a need in our life, whatever that need is, there's enough, there's abundant supply, but there's abundant supply of love and care and compassion. And if we open ourselves to it, we'll find it and we'll see it.
Yes, and whatever our needs will and can be met, but we block ourselves. And almost always that's the problem. We block it ourselves. For example, too, when we pray for specifics, then we're limiting ourselves. Where if we pray with praise and thanksgiving that what we want has already been accomplished, then it's much more apt to be accomplished. And also, we go through the whole situation so much better and easier. And I'm thinking, too, of failed relationships, whether it's a relationship of any type or a friendship, a relationship, a marriage, and that ends not in death, but in the two people separating themselves. Well, it's so easy to be bitter. It's so it would seem, but it's so much easier to not be bitter and to end that relationship with friendship. And I know that I know of various people who've been divorced who carry on a decent friendship, and others find that very strange indeed. Well, you and I would find it more strange to not carry on with a friendship, because if you thought enough of that person to have a relationship with them over the years, then my goodness, we can at least be friends afterwards. So, and it makes life so much more wonderful and easier for everyone to bear when there's not enmity between people. So I would say to any of our listeners to look at your own relationships that are ending and keep them up, and keep them friendly, and see them as God's as your equivalent in God's eyes, because we're all each equal, and we're all equal in God's eyes. It wouldn't matter what our stature in life. And so when we look at others in that way, with love and respect, even though a circumstance has changed, it's just like when we change our work situation and we go from one place to another, and then you hear people talking badly about their former employer, or worse yet, they're still working for the person but denigrating them. Well, it takes away from the dignity of the job, and it takes away from the dignity of the person who's doing the denigrating, because they shouldn't belittle themselves to stay there if they're not going to respect that person.
Absolutely. And I'm thinking now of so many people with whom we've counseled over the years who've lost jobs, been fired, or been laid off for a variety of reasons. And one of the things that people so often come to me and they'll say, well, what am I going to do? Isn't it awful? Isn't it terrible? And I'll often respond to them, well, it's awful if you choose to see it as awful. But really, what's going to happen is you're going to find a wonderful new job.
Yeah.
And we need to believe that, and we need to know that, and we need to understand that if one job ends, there's another one. And if one relationship ends, there's another one. And it doesn't mean that we throw things away, and it doesn't mean that we're cavalier or irresponsible, but it does mean that when these circumstances and situations happen in our lives, and they're going to happen, no matter how good we are, no matter how holy or pious we are, no matter what we do, they're going to happen, because that's what life is about. Life is about hills and valleys, experiences, and understanding and realizing how strong we really are, and claiming the abundance and the prosperity and the fact that there is enough. If one loses a job, then it certainly can hurt. It can be a painful experience. It can cause an individual to pause, but then it's also an opportunity to say, now, do I want to do what I've been doing?
Yeah.
Do I want to change my career? Do I want to move completely? So many wonderful things come from the end of jobs, and yet so often, as you know, individuals will talk about how unfair it was, how terrible it was, how our insecurities, and it goes to the heart of what we believe about ourselves. And what we need to believe about ourselves is, I can get another job. I'm a good person. I'm a strong person. I'm a bright person. And that really comes from a consciousness of abundance and prosperity in the midst of every circumstance and situation. And so often when people come and say, I've been fired, and they say, what am I going to do? I often have to bite my lips to keep from saying, isn't it grand that you've been fired? Isn't it wonderful that you've been fired? Because people don't need to hear that at that point in time, but it is really and genuinely my feeling, because if they're willing to look at that circumstance and situation in a positive and affirmative way, they will find a better job. They will find a good job. They will be led to a new place. The same with a relationship. It's hard when you stand at a graveside and you bury someone that you love, that a relationship has ended, or if you come home and that individual's gone, or whatever's happened to end a relationship. Certainly there's unhappiness and there are tears, and we need to go through that grieving process. But on the other side of that grieving process, there's going to be something wonderful that's going to happen, and something wonderful is going to come out of it. And just as the gentleman that I was just mentioning a few moments ago here, 90 years old, for heaven's sakes. And I have no doubt that if his present wife were to die, or the relationship were to end, that he is the resilient kind of a person. And as he said many times, and he's a prolific writer, and he'll write, I'm just the kind of a person who never wants to be alone. And I have no doubt that he would never be alone, and that he would grieve and go through the sadness, but then he would go on with his life because of his belief and understanding of his own connectiveness to the divine and limitless potential, and the fact that there's enough love for everyone. There's enough of everything for everyone. And if we could just believe that, and if we could just share that with other people, think of the people we could feed, think of the people we could clothe, think of the jobs that we could, and lives that we could redirect. Isn't it a wonderful thing?
Yes, it is. And also that gentleman knew what he needed. He needed a helpmate by his side constantly. And that there are people who really don't, and they think they're a failure if they're not married or if they're not in a relationship, but they just need to have the courage of their own convictions to do what, as that gentleman did, what we know will make us happy. And so if we each know ourselves, and there's that, I think it was even before Socrates, it was said, know thyself, and thou knowest all. And we need to know ourselves and know what we really need and want. Just because other people need and want certain things doesn't mean that we necessarily do. And then there's different passages in our lives where there's times when we need and want one thing, and then there's times we need and want another. So we need to know that there's plenty for us there all the time for everyone, regardless of our circumstance, and we have a right to know what we want and then to opt out for that. And when we do, then we're more happy with all of life, and we're less critical of other people because we see that everyone's manifesting whatever it is they want in their lives.
And that's true, isn't it? That we do manifest what we need and what we want in our lives. And if we're manifesting limit and lack of any kind, we can change our way of thinking. And if we change our way of thinking, we can change the quality of our lives. And if we change the relationship that we have with those around us and the relationship that we have with the presence and power of God, dynamic and wonderful and magnificent things can begin to happen. We hope that the ideas and concepts that we've been sharing with you have been useful, and we hope that you know and understand and realize fully that there is indeed enough of everything that you need in your life.
Mike and Iris would like to extend a cordial invitation for you to join them this Sunday morning at 11 a.m. for our weekly celebration service at the beautiful Seaport Marina Hotel at the corner of Pacific Coast Highway and 2nd Street, adjacent to the Marina Pacifica and Marketplace shopping centers. There will be a guided meditation, prayers, spirited music, and a dynamic, life-changing New Thought message. Please join us this Sunday. You will be warmly welcomed into the company of like-minded, positive, and uplifting people. And remember, whatever your dream, whatever your vision, you can attain it through confident living.